But thank you very much for having me. I know this is kind of early. I'm actually surprised to see even this number of people here, especially after a night out. So yeah, as George said, I've been in gaming for only 6 years, which isn't that long, but if you consider like it's been since basically day one of the Facebook platform, it's a relevant amount of time for social and mobile gaming. And before I start, a couple assumptions about my perspective, where I'm coming from here. One, I'm very much thinking about things from a world in which developing for a mobile environment is really important. Technologies behave differently whether you're connected to high-speed desktop web or a very flaky internet connection, so just keep that in mind. Also, I'm a lot less of a technologist than most of the people in this industry, so I'm coming about this from the business side of things, the business decision around HTML5 or other technologies. The product decision and the tech decision are very often different conversations, related and adjacent, but different. And as George alluded to, we as a company, we started building mobile games in HTML5 in June of 2011. So it's been 2 years now. We have given this a very legitimate shot. It was not test around for a week or two and then bail or choose. So even though I'm not a technologist, kind of been dancing with HTML5 for a long time. So without further ado, we begin. The title is Preparing Games for the Ever-Changing Social Casino Market. Is HTML5 the answer? My first slide was, and I got rid of it, but it was just a big slide that said no. So I will get into why, but there, I just gave it away. So we have a lot of choices in terms of what we can choose to develop with for mobile and desktop web environments. Obviously, you can go native. That's kind of the choice that most people make. HTML5 gets a ton of buzz and a ton of press as the technology of the future. But obviously, Unity and Adobe Air have a lot of traction and momentum at this point, and they have certainly kind of superseded HTML5 by now. So quickly, I'm just going to do a couple very brief definitions. A lot of this will be redundant, but just in case it isn't to some of you. CPI, it's an industry term that's thrown around, cost per install, which is basically your marketing spend divided by the number of paid installs. That's your paid CPI. Your effective CPI is the effective cost per install. So that's the marketing spend divided by total installs. That takes into account organic installs that you get on top of the paid installs. Very, very important in the mobile world because that's where you hear people talking about where you rank in the charts. And the higher you rank in the charts, the more organic installs you get. Therefore, you're basically buying down your effective cost per install. I'll also throw in here ECPPI, which is effective cost per paid install. It's just blended average. ARPDAU, average revenue per daily active user. It's really, really a terrible metric. But everybody, including me and everyone at my company, throws it around a lot. It's just daily revenue divided by daily active users. It's actually really not that indicative if you think about it. LTV is the main thing that we should all be measuring against regularly. ARPDAU is part of that, but retention figures in a lot. So in a world where retention is important, ARPDAU is actually a bad metric, but we throw it around a lot. So just very brief description of the landscape. As I said, I got started on day one of the Facebook platform being live. That was February of 2007, March, April. So at that point, there were 0 social and or mobile titles. The App Store didn't even exist. By July of 2011, there were about 5, now I'm getting into just mobile, not Facebook. There were about 5 competitive slots titles. The average effective cost per install was 2 pennies. The average cost per paid install was about 50 cents. By February of 2012, there were about 45 competitive slots titles. Effective cost per install was 4 cents, and the effective cost per paid install was $1.25. So you see it's moving quickly. By the end of 2012, 500 competitive titles. I think the last presentation somebody said 450. It's around 1,500 if you take iOS, Android, Kindle, and Facebook. But competitive, like decent titles that you might have even the slightest chance of fearing, about 500. And the eCPI has gone up 11-fold, so 44 cents, and $1.75 effective cost per paid install. And then more recently, 900 titles, hundreds, if not thousands of titles. Effective cost per install is 85 cents, and the paid installs are around 250. If you want any volume, bids need to be around 250. So it's kind of indicative of a major shift. Things get very competitive, things get very expensive. It's hard to be just dabbling two guys in a garage and actually compete in this marketplace. So going backwards, what happened? Like, what caused things to get so competitive and so expensive? One, more users got smart devices. I challenge anybody to think of the last time they saw somebody actually open a flip phone. It does not happen very frequently. Certainly in the Bay Area, but even across the rest of the country and the world, more and more people are getting on smart devices where these games are more easily downloaded and played. Google and Apple collected a lot more credit cards. This is one of the greatest things you could ever ask for as a content developer. Giving a brick and mortar example, imagine somebody builds a type of store that you can put your goods into, and people can walk into that store and walk out of that store and be charged almost automatically. That's not something that we're all used to, and I think it's something that we often do take for granted in terms of complaining about the 30%, things like that. The number of credit cards that Apple and Google have on file and ready to be charged is amazing. Those two things combined, a lot of credit cards and a lot of users, basically made mobile become the mode, the stylish development platform. So where it was Facebook, and it still is Facebook for a lot of people, justifiably so, now really everybody is focusing on iOS and Android, as well as Windows, even BlackBerry sometimes, Kindle. So again, just kind of centering this whole talk around that. And at that point, everybody flooded in. Is a greenfield opportunity. Small companies with very little startup money to massive companies with billions in the bank. Everybody jumped in, and that's why we have that number of titles, that effective cost per paid install skyrocketing. At the same time, social became a little less relevant. And we throw around in social, I think a lot of the real money and land-based casino operators, when they say social, they basically mean virtual currency. For people who have been developing on social platforms, we actually do mean at least somewhat social with viral channels. Facebook, as their platform matured and as everybody was getting spam with 1,000 Farmville requests per day, they had to cut down on the viral channels. And the virals in a mobile environment are a lot less powerful, a lot less effective. I guess that's in part a function of just screen size, screen real estate, typing on a device. It's not as easy to just throw in a couple names and blast out an invite as it is on a larger desktop web. But as we all know, social hasn't really worked amazingly well. In some cases, words with friends, things like that, it has, but very rarely does it work for mobile games. So facing these challenges, developers tried to differentiate in three main areas. I'm generalizing, I'm definitely summarizing. There's a lot more detail under this, but for all intents and purposes, people would say, I'm going to develop a better game than what's out there, and people are going to prefer mine and stick with mine. People said, I'm going to monetize the heck out of all of my users, so even if I have a small audience, I'll be making more money than you. And some companies had the ability to say, well, we're just going to outspend you. We're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, per week, per day, per month. We're going to be at the top of the charts. We're going to get all these high-quality organic installs. And even if our game is crappy compared to yours, you don't stand a chance because nobody's ever going to see it. And that just kind of makes things even more difficult for independent developers, which I think most people here are. Other point of differentiation, and we're hearing a lot about it, the presentation just before me talked a lot about it. If you can allow your players to play for real money, that is a major differentiation point. All sorts of speculation about the crossover, people who want to play for virtual currency versus real money. Is there crossover there? How can you get people to crossover? But if you can do it successfully, I think we can all agree that it's a major differentiation point. So all that being said, very competitive landscape, very difficult to compete, three main ways to compete. How can you bring that all together, and how can your technology choice kind of guide that and make that a little easier for your company? One, being cross-platform is very important. That's between desktop web and mobile web, but also iOS and Android and two different native technologies. There is not a single winner on the games platform front. For a long time, it was Facebook, but now you can't say it's Facebook, you can't say it's iOS, you can't say it's Android. You have to say it's all of those, plus probably a few others. Cross-connection, kind of what I delved into in the beginning with a high-speed desktop connection versus a flaky mobile connection. Cross-cultural, there are millions upon millions of people all over the world coming from many different cultures, speaking many different languages, playing these games. High production value, you can't get away with low production value anymore. I will get into that a little later. Low production costs, less relevant for big companies with massive budgets, but extremely relevant for any small company who's hoping to compete with these massive companies. And robust, very vague term. What does robust mean? I'll get into it. So cross-platform, like I said, you got to be prepared for mobile and desktop. You have to be prepared for tablet, all the different handheld devices, and still it's worth at least having games on the desktop web. So just framing things, cross-connection, like I said, your games have to be playable when people go underground, when people lose their connection, when people go from a pretty decent LTE connection to a very flaky edge. Cross-cultural, it really helps if your games are localized everywhere. People often think that localization is just translation. It doesn't work. In the West, translating from English to German or French, that does, for many reasons, work reasonably well. But just translating from English into simplified Chinese or Korean, that doesn't necessarily work. Culturally, users expect very different things. Color schemes are different. Information flow is different. So localization has to be a little more than just translating words. High production value. This is kind of where we get into the heart of it. And this is the product point of HTML5. When we started as a company back 2 years ago, and it was the top of that matrix that I had in the beginning, when there was not a lot of competition, we could put out what was frankly a subpar casino product. Slots reels were kind of jerky. They didn't have, you can't even really have animation. Sound bridges in HTML5 are terrible. PhoneGap says they offer one, but it doesn't really work. We had to effectively build our own. That no longer works. It worked for us to get a footprint, to get out there when there wasn't a lot of competition. But now when you have Zynga and Gree and DNA and all of these companies with extremely high production values coming out, you can't compete with a lower quality product, and I'm pointing the finger directly at myself and our company. Low production costs. If you're Gree or DNA or Zynga, you can probably afford to have your iOS studio, your Facebook studio, and your Google studio developing in native iOS, native Android, and usually Flash. If you're a small startup and you want to be on all three of those platforms, it doesn't make a lot of sense to build teams around each of those technologies. And robust. This applies a lot to two things. One is live ops. Everybody here hears a lot about live ops. I think Funzio may have coined the term. It's probably more of a Japanese mechanic originally, but that is doing events and doing just changes to the game in the middle of the game that get people excited and get a lot of people playing at once. That kind of server load, you need to have some robust technology. It's also very relevant to the conversation around real money gaming. When you need to be secure, when you need to have full accounting backends, which are very different businesses than just developing a front end of a game, robust technology is a very important choice. The front end choice you make, which is basically what we're talking about, is a little less important, but how it hooks into your back end is very important to consider. So this is effectively my summary slide. I'm going to go through each of your main choices: native, Adobe Air, Unity, and HTML5. I know there are others. I would have loved to have gotten them in, but this is kind of the bulk of the industry choice. So one is cross-platform. Each of the subsequent three are good to be cross-platform. You can develop a game in HTML5, Unity, or Adobe Air through Flash, and you can be live on the desktop web and the mobile web, iOS, Android, Kindle, Windows now supports Unity. Windows they considered HTML5 their native language. So cross-platform, the only one that doesn't deliver it really is Native Technologies. Cross-connection, Native is great for it. Adobe Air is potentially, like, you can architect things where it is strong. Unity is fantastic for a cross-platform because it is a front-end language. HTML5, because it's delivered by a server and server-based, it's not good for going in and out of connection. Cross-cultural, they all can do it. Unity has some really, really nice plugins that allow you to localize very quickly. But going back to what I was talking about with localization before, it really is just string translation and less of a full localization plugin. High production value, can't do it in HTML5. And that's kind of what I was talking about with, we were able to compete 2 years ago, a year ago even, with HTML5 because the production value of all of our competition was not quite there. Now, as older games have matured and as newer games have come in with amazing production values, we've pushed the limits of HTML5 in a mobile environment. I think we can say with great amount of confidence that we have done more with that technology than anyone in the mobile game space, if not that, certainly the social casino space. But take it from me, you cannot compete on a product level with HTML5. Production cost savings, very related to the cross-platform part of the top, but because native is not cross-platform, you probably have to build separate studios around it, and that gets expensive. And then finally, robust. HTML5 is very, very hackable. Does plug in nicely to a server checking backend, but it's very hackable. So it's definitely not the choice for a lot of the real money and land-based casino operators. So I think it's pretty clear what my take is. Native, wonderful technology. You can build very high-quality games, but it's not great for startups if they want to be on multiple platforms. HTML5, it really does fall short. So if you just look at the two in the middle, I think the choice can basically be made in mainly one area. Did you have a prior Facebook web experience that was built in Flash? If so, Adobe Air very well might be your best choice. And if you're just getting started directly in a casino-heavy environment, Unity very well might be your best choice. So I saw some people raising their hands. We're running out of time. How much time do we have? A couple more minutes, so probably a couple brief questions.
So was most of the issue with HTML5 based on my experience in mobile and HTML before the App Store or the audio?
It's not limited to the audio, but the audio is a big part of it. One thing that I'll tell people when they're considering it, you can't even have two animations on the screen at the same time. So you can't have stars bouncing and coins going up to the balance at the same time. And that's, it sounds like a very trite thing, but in terms of reward mechanics and feedback mechanics in casino games, that's pretty darn important. So.
The real money gaming space in Europe, HTML5 is pretty much the go-to technology.
Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah.
There's legacy issues with companies made a lot of gains in that technology, and it's sort of but what's your perspective on that? I think it's the regulatory environment is well certified by government officials and complicated process to go live, much more complicated to go back and re-architect.
Yeah. No.
What do you think happens?
Probably shouldn't speak too much about it because I'm by far not an expert from it. But when I speak to like Ladbrokes and Paddy Power, these are guys that have been operating for, in Paddy Power's case, hundreds of years. They have a lot of HTML5 development. They work with a lot of HTML5 partners. It is the choice in many ways, but they complain a ton about the security measures and how unsecure it is. So does that answer your question? All right. Any other questions?
What's insecure about it?
It's purely front end. It's in a lot of cases as much as just checking the source code and hacking it. If you're doing server checks against it in the back end, then yes, you can guard against that, but that dramatically slows down the experience. So it's hard to batch all of your results and send them up to the server and then back down if you have to check every single spin or every single coin drop on a bingo card, whatever it is. So, okay, time. thank you very much. And yeah.